So, as we begin our study of early American history, we're looking not only at the cultures that existed within North America prior to contact, but we also address the fundamental question: what was going on over in Europe that all of a sudden made thousands of Europeans say, I need to leave where I'm living and go west? I need to cross this dangerous ocean and settle in a faraway place that I've never seen because my life is going to be that much better for it. So we have to begin with religion. The importance of organized religion in colonial America can't be understated, mostly because even today, religion does play a fundamentally important role in American society. So, to set the context, all right, context meaning what's going on at the time, what's the background that can help us understand certain things. We begin in Western Europe in about the early 1500s. Now, as you look at this, remember early 1500s, and you'll see many dates have a mark through them. So if you want to make a note of when they are, that's fine. I include the dates because invariably there are people who will ask when something occurred. But this just gives you an idea of time frame. All right, so Columbus sailed the ocean blue in 1492. A few decades later, this is the situation. Now, by and large, there was one minor disruption, but the Roman Catholic Church had pretty much been in charge of Western Europe for about 1,000 years. All right, 1,000 years they've been running the show. Now, the Roman Empire fell in the late 400s. All right, again, the late 400s. So the Roman Catholic Church fills the void. They fill administrative or government functions, they fill economic functions, they take over education and also social functions. They also had similar structures to the Romans. You know, there were kings in Western Europe who ruled over different types of territories, but it was kind of widely accepted that they needed the blessing of the Pope for their reign to be legitimate. So moving forward, yes, we have Roman Catholic is bolded, but we have church in quotes. And the reason that church is in quotes and capitalized is you might see references to the church. If you just see the church, that means Roman Catholic Church. So they've been in charge for about 1,000 years. Enter Martin Luther, whose image you can see in the lower right-hand corner. Now, he's a German man. All right, he's German. He's training to be a lawyer so he can help his father out with his business. Multiple sources indicate that just one day, Luther was struck by lightning. He got struck by lightning, he survived, and he decided to devote his life to God. And he became a monk. Now, it upset his father that he wasn't going to become a lawyer, but Luther felt his following was to be a monk in the church and to serve God. Now, one day, Martin Luther was traveling to Rome. He was making what we call a pilgrimage, a religious journey, because Rome is where the Pope lives. It's very important to the Roman Catholic Church. Now, he sees a man who's selling indulgences. Now, an indulgence, which you can see bolded here, an indulgence was more or less a piece of paper. And symbolically, it meant that when you died, you would skip purgatory and go straight to heaven. Because, see, within the church, purgatory is kind of like a waiting room where you're waiting to see if you're going to be allowed access to heaven. An indulgence allows you to skip it and get quicker access into heaven. Now, these indulgences were originally issued by the Pope during an event called the Crusades, when he was trying to raise knights, raise an army to reclaim the Holy Land. Now, hundreds of years later, you can actually purchase indulgences. Luther doesn't like that. We see here he considers the church corrupt. He believes that you shouldn't have to buy your way into heaven. You shouldn't have to buy salvation. What you should be able to do is achieve salvation through good works, through interpreting the Bible, and through good deeds, so to speak. So, what he does is he publishes something called the 95 Theses, grievances, problems that he has with the Catholic Church. Now, he never intends to kick off what's called the Protestant Reformation. And if we break this down, protest, you go against, reform, change. He never wanted to form a new religion, but, an idea, it's going to get out there. And whenever an idea gets out there, there's going to be different people who take different meanings from it. All right, one reason why this idea will spread, these theses, there was a relatively recent innovation called the printing press. So he can mass produce his 95 theses, and they're distributed throughout Europe. And it's such a controversy that the church kicks him out. They excommunicate him. They tell him, you are no longer a Catholic. You are not going to heaven. But his ideas spread. And again, we see that everyone is saved through salvation. You can achieve that salvation through reading and interpreting the Bible, which most people couldn't up to that point. It was a mixture of different languages, like Greek. Most Europeans at the time, they can't read Greek. But when he was excommunicated, he took refuge in the castle of a king named Frederick III, and he translated the New Testament from Greek into German. This allows common people to read and interpret it, and it's one of the reasons why, if you want, you can read the Bible today, predominantly in what your native language happens to be. So step one in why religion is important, Martin Luther has different ideas about how to achieve salvation and breaks away. He didn't want to break away, but it happened. Hence the Lutheran faith. So that's step one in what we call the Protestant Reformation. Now, again, when ideas get out there, they change, they evolve, which leads us to our second individual, John Calvin, operating a few decades after Luther originally publishes his theses. That was in 1517. Now, Calvin is an interesting person. I mean, if you're familiar with this comic, Calvin and Hobbes, the cartoonist who drew Calvin and Hobbes specifically named 6-year-old Calvin after this man, John Calvin, a man who believed that most humans were beyond saving, meaning they're not going to get into heaven. He believed in this idea, predestination. Pre meaning before, destination, where you end up. The idea here is that when you're born, your path is already determined. As in, when you're born, it's already been decided whether or not you're going to heaven or whether you are not going to heaven. There's nothing in this life that you can do that can necessarily change that idea. And you can see down here, this comic actually kind of plays on this notion of predestination. Now, the interesting thing about this is even though your path is chosen for you, you would think that that means you can act however you want, do whatever you want, because who cares? It's the opposite. Calvinism is a very punitive faith. Punitive meaning you get punished for stepping out of line. Now, the death penalty was the punishment for many things like blasphemy or witchcraft or adultery. Despite the fact that only a select few could be saved, everyone still needs to live a moral life, and they need to live what we call a pious life. Pious means you're very religious. You follow established religious customs, you attend church on Sunday, things of that nature. So Luther kicks it off with the Protestant Reformation. Calvin continues this religious evolution away from the strict Catholic teachings. Calvin's notion of predestination, living a moral life, punishment for bad behavior, this is going to influence a group of people known as Puritans. And if you've ever heard of the Puritans before, you know that eventually they're going to make their way across the Atlantic. So we start with Luther and the Reformation, we continue with Calvin and predestination. And as we get to the Puritans, enter the Puritans, you might have heard of this individual you see on the left, Henry VIII, an English king. Now, Henry VIII, if you've heard of him, he's mostly famous because there was a song decades ago that was written about him, sung by a group called Herman's Hermits, and it was all about his various wives that he had. Now, his first wife, Catherine of Aragon, which Aragon is a kingdom in what's now Spain. Henry VIII wanted a divorce because his wife did not produce a male heir, meaning she didn't give him a son, which scientifically we know it was Henry's fault, but that's besides the point. He wants a divorce. The Pope, the leader of the Catholic Church, refuses. He says, no, marriage is a sacrament. You completed the sacrament in front of, God and country. You cannot just break it. So King Henry says, okay, fine. I'm going to form my own church. What you see here, Anglican Church, the Angles, people from England. This is what we call the Church of England. And of course, if you're the king, you form the church, you're the leader of it. So Henry VIII is the leader of the Church of England, and future kings are the leader of it. Now, he has to get the support of what's called Parliament. In England, they have Parliament. In the United States, we have Congress. So Parliament is Congress for England. So Parliament backs him up. Now, we see this concept, church equals state. The church and state were somewhat one and the same. The king is leader of the nation and the government. That's the state. But he's also the leader of the Church of England. That's where church and religion comes into play. So church and state were tied together. Now, this church is a Protestant church. Yes, it's Christian, but it's a type, it shoots off of Catholicism. If you think of the Roman Catholic Church as a tree, the Anglican Church is a branch of it. One of the issues is you have these Puritans. Now, Puritans simply mean that, they're a group of people who feel that the Reformation hasn't quite been finished in England. They're a group of people within the Church of England that thinks, hey, we haven't quite finished all of our work yet. They feel that the Anglican Church is compromised. They compromised on religious ideas because they needed to accommodate all people in the British Isles. So these Puritans, there's some who feel that there are too many Catholic elements within the Anglican Church. The monarchy, meaning the king, appoints bishops. In the Catholic Church, the Pope, one man who's in charge, appoints bishops. So that's one thing where they see, hey, maybe we need to change this. We're too Catholic. We're too Catholic in terms of the hierarchy. The king is too tolerant of other types of faiths. King James declares that the Puritans are evil, and most of them reformed. Most of them, they back off. But some begin to look elsewhere, where they can practice a new type of purified faith. That's where Puritans come from. Keep in mind, there's 3 sections of the colonies we're concerned with. The New England colonies, the Middle colonies, the Southern colonies. These Puritans are going to mainly affect the New England settlements.